Kia ora and welcome to our first video module for Impact Coach training. The purpose of this video is to understand the research of relationships first. We will look at why relationships matter in accelerating success, in particular for Māori, Pacifica, and marginalised students who are not achieving as well as others in our education systems. Throughout this video, there will be times where you'll be asked to pause the video and complete a short activity before moving on. To start off with an introduction, I'm Elise White, and I'm an education consultant for Cognition Education. I'm based in Hamilton and specialise in delivering the Relationships First PLD and developing cultural responsiveness in schools. Relationships First is drawn from Russell Bishop's research, which focuses on the importance of relationships in bringing about educational success for Māori and minoritised students. These publications, shown in this photo, describe the findings from more than a decade of research where differential power relationships and traditional teaching methods have failed to support our Māori learners. Russell Bishop was the project leader of Tikotahitanga, which led to significantly improved student achievement outcomes for Māori learners. He continues to guide research and development initiatives that explore how to improve educational outcomes for Māori and minoritised students. Based on this research, we'll be sharing with you a step-by-step guide where together we can form common practices that will dramatically improve the outcomes for Māori learners. Relationships First is not primarily about the visible elements of a culture. Rather, culture is defined as how students and their families make sense of the world. It is a set of norms and practices that we operate in. This provides a significant resource for teachers to build on in order to close the gap between the world of the classroom and the world of the students. It takes caring and responsive relationships for this to occur. Relationships matter and are key in educational improvement, particularly for Indigenous or marginalised students who are not yet achieving as well as others in our education systems. When you hear the words Indigenous or marginalised, what do these words mean to you? There is a common language used within the Relationships First pedagogical framework, and some of the terms we use may not be familiar. Understanding the language or terms is important, as they represent complex ideas and some confronting issues that we need to address in order to make changes. This brings us to our first activity. On this slide is a word bank of commonly used terms in Relationships First. Discuss with a buddy what you think the definitions of each word are. Check your thinking against the glossary provided on our Google site. And once you've done this, continue playing the video. The Tikotahitanga project looked at explanations for why some students achieved success and why some didn't. Before we look at their findings, think about your own explanations. For our next activity, discuss with a buddy, how do you explain why some students in your school experience success and others don't? Once you've done this, continue playing the video. In the original research, Russell conducted interviews with students, whānau, leaders and teachers to find out what made the greatest impact on student achievement. The purpose of these interviews was threefold. First, to identify what was actually happening in classrooms and schools according to the various groups interviewed. Secondly, what Māori students understood about the learning environments that were being created for them in their classrooms. And finally, what impact these environments were having on Māori students' learning and achievement. When the voices were analysed, there were three main explanations for students' performance: the child and their family, the structure in the school, and the relationships in the classroom. The child included factors such as their attendance, poverty, attitudes to learning, the fact they might not have had lunch to bring to school, they might have had solo parents, the cultural values of the family. The structures within the school included factors such as class sizes, funding, timetabling, curriculum, subject choices, or the education system itself. The relationships included factors such as the teacher voicing and demonstrating high expectations, caring and nurturing for learners, knowing what they needed to learn, or using strategies to promote agency. As you will see in this graph, the Māori students were very clear that it was the relationships they had with their teachers that had the greatest impact on their learning. This position was supported by their families and to a slightly lesser degree by the leaders. Before we move on, pause the video and discuss, what do you think the teachers' views were? In sharp contrast were the explanations offered by the teachers, who identified that it was the child and their home that had the greatest impact upon Māori students' learning. The majority of the teachers tended to dwell upon what they identified as students' deficiencies and the problems these deficiencies caused for the students' learning. The research showed that 80% of the students identified their relationship with their teacher as the critical influence on their achievement. By contrast, 60% of the teachers identified the student's home and family background as the major influence. Confronted with this evidence and supported with professional development, the teachers recognised that to make a difference, they would need to change their beliefs and practices rather than expect family circumstances to change. Our thinking and beliefs shape our practice. So if our thinking and beliefs are deficit, or we have deficit explanations for why particular students are not achieving, our relationships and interactions with those students will always be negative. Teachers matter, and improving teacher quality is the single most effective way to improve student outcomes. Our role as impact coaches is to coach teachers to improve their practice so they are the most effective. The research of Russell Bishop, based on the voice collected from the Māori students, shows us what is required for effective teaching. This graph is a diagrammatic representation of the research. Each dot represents an observation of a teacher. Over the course of the Te Kotahitanga project, the researchers completed over 3,500 observations. In each observation, the teachers were given 2 scores. One was for how well they formed relationships with their students, the x-axis coordinate, and one for how often they used effective teaching strategies, the y-axis coordinate. Note the sweet spot in the northeast quadrant, where there is high relationships and high use of the effective teaching strategies. This is what we are aiming for, and what the research tells us is the most effective in accelerating student achievement. For your next activity, let's imagine 2 teachers. Teacher 1 has a high score for relationships, but a low score for using effective teaching strategies. Teacher 2 is a sweet spot and has a high score for building relationships and a high score for using effective teaching strategies. Discuss with a buddy, what would you see and hear in the classrooms of each of those teachers? Once you've done this, continue playing the video. I want you now to focus on the top left of the graph. You will see that there are no dots in this quadrant. There were no observations where the teachers scored low in relationships, but were able to use effective teaching strategies. What this clearly shows us is that teachers can't use effective teaching strategies with students if they do not have strong relationships with them. Hence, relationships first. You must first build strong relationships in order to be able to use effective teaching strategies that we know are the most effective in accelerating achievement. And this concludes this video unpacking the research that Relationships First is based on. One last activity to finish with. Please complete the Padlet found in our Google site, answering what are 2 ideas you will take away from the research and what questions do you have?